Hi guys, so previously I've done other videos talking about test cutting. That is, cutting objects like tatami mats or water bottles or green bamboo or whatever you like to cut. And I have given, some warnings about how to cut well. And what I find interesting is there's always a small group of people who say, oh, well, anybody can cut with a sharp sword. You don't need to practice it. Well, in my experience, you might not need to practice it a lot, but it's a very, very useful exercise to do sometimes. Why do I believe that? Because frankly, I have seen people with my very own eyes, and not just one person, not just two people, but numbers of people who were experienced fencers. That is, for years they had been using swords in practicing techniques and fencing in competitions, and some of these people were quite good fencers, quite competent fencers, historical fencers, not modern fencers. And when they went to do test cutting, to cut through things with a sharp sword, they were awful. Okay? And where this stems from is that essentially in historical fencing or in certain other types of sword art, maybe kendo, maybe eskrima, and so on, the focus is on using a blunt sword simulator to practice defensive and offensive techniques, either in solo forms or with a training partner. And the point is that what people are doing with these blunt sword simulators is training themselves to hit a person and not to cut into them or through them, because of course they're using a blunt simulator like a stick or a blunt sword or a modern fencing weapon perhaps, and they're training themselves repeatedly, sometimes over the course of many, many years, to hit rather than to cut. And there is a very, very important distinction to make between hitting and cutting. That's not to say that if you take a sharp sword and simply hit someone, it won't do any damage. Of course, it will really hurt the person, and you might actually do quite a decent cut some of the time. But what I've noted is that people who have spent a very long time just hitting but not thinking about cutting, when they come to cut, what they usually do is they hit the target and they tend to stop somewhere halfway into it. And that's not very good for a number of reasons, because if we just take one of the reasons, and a very important martially mindseted reason, if I hit with my sharp sword and my sword embeds into someone's shoulder and I stop, my sword is now stuck in their shoulder, okay? I haven't trained myself to cut into their shoulder, follow through, such that I can defend myself quickly and carry on acting. That's the first thing. So, to cut properly, you want to be able to slice into a target, follow through, and then your weapon to be free again to defend yourself or carry on fighting. The second thing is, if you want to follow up with another attack, another cut, for example. And this is something that I think test cutting is particularly good at teaching, is multiple cuts and how to string them together. And this, in my experience, is something that people who don't ever really practice cutting but do practice lots of fencing, they tend to be okay on the first cut, but often fluff the second or the third cut. So I think it's important to not only practice single solo cuts, because most people can do those pretty well, but actually practicing the first cut and the second cut, getting both successfully done. And if you're using a two-edged sword, a back edge cut and a front edge cut, both ways round. So being able to immediately redirect your sword and maybe putting a defensive action somewhere in the middle there. So a cut, defend, and another cut, for example. Or a back edge cut, defend, and then maybe a thrust and a cut. And stringing these attacks together, okay? So essentially practicing to cut through something is really different to practicing just to hit something to score a point. Okay, thank you.